Welcome to the MedEvidence Podcast, hosted by Dr. Michael Koren and Michelle McCormick. MedEvidence, where we help you navigate the real truth behind medical research with both a clinical and research perspective. In this podcast, we'll have discussions with physicians that have extensive experience in patient care and research. How do you know that something works? In medicine, we conduct clinical trials to see if things work. Now, let's get the truth behind the data.
Welcome to MedEvidence, Truth Behind the Data. I'm Michelle McCormick. 4-part series today about longevity. Can medical research help us live longer? Great question. Joining us today, Dr. Michael Koren, founder and CEO of ENCORE Research Group and a practicing cardiologist. He has been principal investigator of over 2,500 clinical trials and has published extensively in the most prestigious journals in the world. Also joining today is Dr. Victoria Helow, a very well-respected pediatrician who also does clinical research at ENCORE and practices in the emergency room. So very exciting to have you both today on MedEvidence, and great topics coming up. So let's learn a little bit about each of you quickly.
Well, good morning, Michelle. Thanks for having us. And I didn't really recognize myself when you introduced me.
Sounds awesome to me, doctor.
I run clinical trials and tell people that they need to exercise.
Right. Good advice.
That's basically what I do for a living.
Yeah, well, and there is some proof in exercise that it makes us feel better. So
we will certainly get to that.
Yes, we will.
Vicki?
I keep people out of trouble and rescue them when they get in trouble.
There you go. Very, very helpful. We appreciate everything you both do.
She does that really well.
Yeah?
I've run into a number of patients that were quite well rescued. Thank you.
Well, I have to admire what you do in the ER because I think in another life I would have loved to have been an ER doctor. But, we digress. So let's talk about longevity. This is something that we're all looking forward to in our lives, the longer that we live. And I think people are living a lot longer.
Well, just define longevity, Vicki.
Yeah.
Longevity is how long you live. But we want to do more than that. We want to make sure that you live longer and live well.
Okay. All right. Well, let's talk about how to do that.
And it's also the science of how long we live.
Right.
So there are different elements of it, and we'll dig into that a little bit more today. But certainly that's something that we share as human beings. We all want to live long, healthy lives.
I think so.
The problem with studying that and researching that, of course, is it takes a long time.
Right. So if you have a subject, you have to kind of follow them. At what point do you start with a subject and then how long until, I guess, they pass away?
Right. Yeah, there's, I guess, cartoons that could depict that. Walking down the street and having weights fall on your head is not conducive to longevity. Right. I wish we'd have known that before. A bunch of out-of-touch scientists coming up with this conclusion. So it can be tricky.
It can be.
Yeah.
But there's also things that we can avoid, hazardous things, and we need to make sure that we are doing those, and those are the simple.
Well, Vicki's starting to tell our secrets.
All right, let's go there, Dr. Koren.
Should we let them know the secrets right away?
No.
You're tough.
Let's just let them know that we are involved in clinical research and that there is lots of clinical research, and it's taking lots of time.
She's the bad cop. I'm going to be the good cop.
All right. Let's play.
Okay. Anyway, we like to think of the world of longevity as having 3 secrets. The first is to avoid hazardous things. And we'll talk about that in more detail, but it seems pretty logical. Mm-hmm. The second one is to maximize healthy lifestyles. And certainly we have a lot of people in this room and elsewhere that spend a lot of time to make sure they're doing everything right in terms of diet and exercise, and we'll talk a bunch about that. But the one that we also do for a living, we do professionally, is that we discover the relevant medical evidence for folks and apply its wisdom.
That sounds like a secret sauce right there.
It's a really, really good one, and actually applies also to number 1 and 2. So discover the relevant medical evidence and apply its wisdom.
Okay. Well, I think we need to dig a little deeper into that because they sound simple enough, honestly.
They are simple.
But how do we make that apply?
They actually work, and we have scientific evidence to show that they work.
And I love that. There is research behind the secret sauce.
But it's so confusing because there's so much noise out there
right.
that it's hard to know.
Well, it's like, who do you believe? Because you're getting hit on social media with that magic pill, or you're hearing about it on the news. And, what is the secret to longevity.
So before we get into all these secrets, I have to share some not such good news. So there's been only 3 times in American history when average life expectancy has gone down over a 5-year period. Only 3 times. The first was during the Civil War. The second was between 1915 and 1920 during World War I and the flu pandemic. And the most recent example is between 2015 and 2020, before COVID, by the way. So between 2015 and 2020, average U.S. life expectancy went down over a 5-year period. That's really very rare in our history. Usually life expectancy is going up, and really cause for concern. And part of our motivation to do these type of podcasts is to help people reverse that trend. And we're actually doing really well. Between 1980 and 2010, there was dramatic decreases in cardiovascular death and morbidity. And unfortunately, as of around 2015, that sort of flattened out. And actually, there's been an uptick in the death rate here in the U.S.
So, I mean, what causes, so Civil War, World War I.
And the flu epidemic was the same 5 years.
But what's the most recent one?
Cardiovascular disease, hazardous things. And I guess it'll be a good segue to get into what hazardous things are.
Right.
And lifestyle issues that are not favorable, and maybe healthcare systems that aren't producing as well as they should.
Do you think that the population that we have now, since they're more the baby boomers aging, will help with that trend to not have that decrease?
Well, as a card-carrying baby boomer, I hope so.
Well, my grandmother's 95 years old, so I'm hoping for some longevity based on my genetics.
Absolutely.
Too.
And if you follow the secret sauce, you will get there.
We are talking with Dr. Michael Koren, founder and CEO of ENCORE Research Group, as well as Dr. Victoria Helow, a clinical research investigator and ER medicine doctor. So, all right.
So let's jump into avoid hazardous things.
Yes.
So, Vicki, what are some of the hazardous things that you help kids and parents avoid?
Well, avoid being a window washer on a 20-story building is a good start.
Sign me up for that one.
Yes.
Yeah, without a belt or a strap.
Yeah. Obviously, wearing seatbelts, not driving fast, staying out of violent neighborhoods and in violent situations is a big one, unfortunately, that we experience in the emergency room in different areas of Jacksonville. It can vary. And then things that we know can cause issues with cancers, such as sun exposure, tobacco, excessive alcohol, and even illegal drugs can be associated with liver, kidney issues, but then also just increase your risk of dying of overdose and irrational as well as risky behaviors. So those are the obvious hazardous things to avoid as far as behaviors.
Yeah, and I would add to that is when you look at statistics, hazardous things have a huge effect on longevity. And it's one of the reasons the U.S. data don't look so good. So violent crime is certainly an example of that. And when people die of a violent crime, they tend to be young. When people die of accidents, they tend to be young. And when you think about that, if you're 20 or 25 and you die, that has a huge impact on the statistics. Now, we can do all of our best medical work and get you the best advice. You can be the most compliant patient, and we'll squeeze 5 or 10 years out of your life based on what you would have otherwise, compared to not following this medical evidence. However, if somebody dies early and you take 60 years of potential life away, that is horrible for our statistics. So that's one way to think about it. And as Vicki mentioned, things such as driving 100 miles an hour in the highway and getting into a car crash and not surviving that is certainly something that is avoidable.
Yeah, absolutely. But some people would think of like adventures as hazardous too. Rock climbing, whitewater rafting, stuff like that could also be considered hazardous.
And again, we don't tell people not to enjoy life. And you can do all those things with the proper training, the proper precautions,
proper equipment.
So, and then even within that sphere, you have to have some sensibility. So, for example, rock climbing is tremendous, can be challenging, it can be a lot of fun. I have plenty of friends that do it. You should, again, be conditioned for it. You don't you don't want to hang out on your couch for 3 years smoking cigarettes and drinking and then decide I'm going to be a rock climber. That would not be a good idea. So, but if you train for it and you have the right equipment, then that might be terrific. On the other hand, if you decide to climb Mount Everest, you're looking at a 20% mortality rate. So certainly you might want to avoid that if you want to live longer. Not everybody necessarily has that as a goal, but most people do. So that would be a consideration. But there's some practical things I think we should mention. So, for example, probably anybody over 50 shouldn't be getting up on a ladder on the roof. And
I tell my husband that all the time, by the way.
And it sounds simple. And it took me a long time before I took my own advice on that, to be quite honest. But your balance is just not as good when you're 50.
I haven't taken that advice yet.
No.
I was up there the other day cleaning the gutters.
Wow.
It's not a very big pitch.
Get somebody to do it.
All right, point well taken. I will take that home.
But as long as you're following the rules of the ladder, where you have 3 points on at all times. So you have your 2 feet and your leg.
No, I'm off the ladder.
Oh, you're on the roof. Oh, that is hazardous.
Yeah. So again, unfortunately, physiology is that your proprioception and your balance gets less good as you get older. And certainly, it's something that you can delegate to somebody who's younger that has better balance and certainly is trained. So that'd be one of many examples. Even when you're doing healthy lifestyle things, you need to take precautions. So biking is one of those things that's tremendous. It's healthy overall, but Jacksonville is actually an area where there's been a lot of bike accidents historically. And so you need to choose your path well. You need to wear a helmet. You need to, take some care in terms of your approach to something. So when we say avoid hazardous things, all these things are considerations. Yeah,
that's why I prefer my indoor bike. Yeah. Because riding on the streets is scary. It's very scary and very hazardous. Okay.
And just to be a little bit more topical on that point, avoiding hazardous things is also just using common sense. So I know there's been lots of discussion about COVID and how life should go on or not go on during the COVID period. But I would argue that I'm going to go out and go to a restaurant during COVID, but I'm not necessarily going to go into a bar that has 100 people packed in a small space. That is something hazardous that I can easily avoid.
Mm-hmm. Good point. I agree. All right. Well, part of the four-part series of Med Evidence, Truth Behind the Data, we're going to continue in the next part about some more on the research behind living longer.
Absolutely. We'll talk more about lifestyle and med evidence and why that's so important and how to apply med evidence in a very practical way.
Thanks for watching the Med Evidence Podcast. To watch the rest of this series, head over to medevidence.info or subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform.